In the days that followed the concert, it was the main topic of conversation. John had received emails congratulating him and even requests from local media companies for interviews and statements. There were photos from different people being shared around social media. John had his own photos and was spending his time going through them and deciding which ones he would use as publicity. There was even an audio recording which John had been sent, and he was trying to find a way of copying it onto DVDs. Many people from the choir had been asking for any souvenirs from the evening, and John spent most of his day collecting all these together and creating a portfolio for anyone who asked. Kurt was back at work, and Max had booked a couple of days off from his work so that he could help. There was nothing much that he could do, as John was now spending most of his time in the other bedroom in front of Kurt's computers, writing to people and looking at photos. So Max busied himself with the dogs, and he made a trip to the local supermarket to buy supplies in for the house. They had beer in the fridge, but very little food. He was beginning to see how the Christmas concert had disrupted normal life, and now they needed to get back to normal life. For Max, though, he had one job that he was avoiding, but knew that it was time for him to confront. It was a matter of he and Jane in Birmingham and what to do about his relationship. He knew that it was over, but up till now had avoided it. There was also the matter of the house and what he should do about it. It was nearly Christmas, and he had already booked the flights back to Birmingham so that he could spend the holidays there at home, although the term home hardly appeared to be appropriate for him. Moselstraat was his new home, and the one he owned in Birmingham seemed like a distant memory. However, he would have to go back, and he wasn't looking forward to it. How would Jane take the news that everything was over? It was at an end, and also his time living in Britain was also at an end. He felt more at ease in Belgium and distant from his old life in Britain. Now it was time to make the final step and make his move real. For Max, this was one of the loneliest Christmas breaks he'd ever had. He didn't want to be here in Birmingham, and he missed his new life in Belgium. His new friends were now enjoying the holidays in Brussels, and there was, for him, in a house he no longer recognized, he no longer wanted. Jane was more distant now. He could feel it, and he knew she didn't want him there. She had her own life, and in one of the few things she said to him, she pointed out her view. What is the point of having a relationship with someone who is never here? Max then made it clear about his decision. There was no argument, no tears, not even any protest. She was quiet and simply looked at him. With a shrug, she turned away from him and went upstairs to the bedroom. Jane had made her own arrangements for the Christmas holidays, and they did not include him. She explained that she would be away from the house, staying with her family. She wouldn't be returning until he had flown back to Brussels. For Max, this was something of a relief, but it meant that he would be staying here on his own. He had phoned a few friends to see if they were free, but it appeared they were all spending the holidays with family. He could have gone north to his own family, but the thought of making that journey during the holidays didn't appeal to him. And he would then have to explain the breakup between him and Jane. There was something else he didn't want to do. His own emotions were confused enough as it was, and he didn't feel the need to explain any of this to his own family. They were as distant from where he was now than they had ever been before. So, for that Christmas he was alone. He bought food and beer for himself and found himself sitting alone in the lounge watching some children's film on Christmas Day, or something on the television. He could eat what he wanted and drink what he wanted. This Christmas he would get drunk. As he looked around the house, he felt empty. He didn't belong here anymore. It was a shame because he had always liked this house. He had bought it on the basis that it was a nice place to live. He even liked the area it was in. He had lived here for a large part of his working life, and he had a number of friends only a few streets away. He would miss them. He would miss the shops and the pubs. It was a place that was familiar to him and felt comfortable. There was a problem, though. The house was in the wrong place. It was even in the wrong country. He now accepted that if he stayed here any longer, he would lose the life he had made. He would also feel miserable for the end of his life, for the rest of his life. He would just feel lost and miserable and alone. It was clear, whatever the history, he didn't belong here anymore. More importantly, he didn't want to be here anymore. His life was now somewhere else, and he couldn't wait to get back to it. As the plane came into land at Brussels International Airport, Max breathed a sigh of relief. He was finally home. As the wheels touched the tarmac and the plane tiles screeched a little, the landing was safe and smooth. He looked out of the aircraft window and could see the terminal building come into sight. He sat and watched as the plane came into a halt and then turned towards the landing gate that stuck outside of the airport building. It was strange. He was feeling now that he had come home. As he exited the arrivals door with his suitcase in hand, he looked around to see if anyone was there to meet him. He had spoken to Kurt, and he would be there when he landed. At first he couldn't see anyone, but after a few seconds spotted a familiar face looking at him behind the other people who were waiting for friends and family. He quickly walked out into the hall and up to Kurt. At a sidebar, John was also waiting. He had ordered a beer and was sitting happily drinking his beer and looking around at the people who were walking in and out of the airport. "I've got you a beer," he said, smiling. "How was your holiday?" "Terrible," replied Max. "How was yours?" John shrugged. "Okay," he replied. Max sat down at the bar with John and Kurt and toasted them. "I've done it," he said. "I'm now here permanently." The three of them raised their glasses and toasted the future. As they walked into the house, both Wotan and Tosca were there to greet them. Wotan was now fully grown and came up to his waist. "Hi guys," said Max as he walked through the door. Tosca came running up to him and started sniffing around his feet. Wotan was quiet and simply stood in front of him, looking up at him. Max dropped his suitcase and put his arms around Wotan's head. "Wotie," he said enthusiastically and hugged the dog's head. "Wotie, Wolfenbach, how are you?" he said affectionately and hugged Wotan's head even closer to him. Letting go, he reached down where Tosca was still running around his feet. He took hold of her and pulled her up in his arms. She started licking his face quickly and he started to laugh. He hugged her as well as in his arms and then gently placed her back down on the floor. The other two were now in the kitchen. Max took his suitcase and walked into the spare bedroom, his bedroom, and then placed it on the bed. He would unpack it later. For now, he just wanted to be with the others. The Christmas tree was still in the lounge, and various other decorations were arranged around the room. It had a warm feeling on this cold January day. For a moment, he felt slight loneliness again, similar to the one he had felt back in Birmingham. John and Kurt had had their Christmas together without him, and he felt as though he was a stranger here, almost like a spare part, a third person. He felt slightly jealous that they had all been together here, enjoying the Christmas holidays without him. He felt, for once, that he was split between one life and the other, without really feeling at home in either of them. John brought the feeling as he looked around the lounge. "Here," he said, handing him a can of beer. "Welcome back." John smiled his welcoming smile that he had got to know so well. "Thanks," replied Max, taking the can and snapping open the ring pull. He took a drink out of the can. "So you've done it?" asked John, looking at him expectantly. "Yes," replied Max. "I've done it. All I have to do is put the house on the market, and hopefully it will sell for a good price." "Great," said John. For a moment, Max wanted to hug him. He didn't know why. Perhaps he just wanted some kind of confirmation that he'd done the right thing, that he wouldn't at some point regret his decision. It had been a big decision, and for some reason he didn't know if it was the right thing. He was cutting ties, burning bridges back home, and he suddenly felt nervous. It was as if he was stepping out of the door on a long journey. He felt as though he was on a journey, and he didn't know what the road ahead would bring. However, he had made the decision. Not exactly irreversible, but once a house was sold, he would lose the last real connection he had with his old life. There was still his own family back in the north of England. There was his father, who was now widowed and aging, although he was still in good health and enjoying life. His own family had found their place in the world, and as far as he could see, they were all happy with their decisions. Why had this desire to move away from his own country affected him like this? Was it his age, or was it some time in his life when he needed to make a change? Was it a midlife crisis? He had no children, so perhaps it was the lack of it. If he had had a family of his own, then maybe he would feel more settled in Britain. But it hadn't happened. It was if destiny was pushing him in this direction, away from everything he had grown up with and away from everything that he had known. For a moment he felt lost. He had made a major decision, and for a second or two wished that he hadn't been pushed into this decision. But it had been his decision, his alone. It had been the right decision, and whatever the future now held for him, he was on his own, and he would have to deal with any problems that came along. John broke into his thoughts. "I'm going to organize an Easter concert, and you are going to help with it," he said with an enthusiastic smile. "I am?" asked Max, suddenly coming back to the present. "Yes, you and Kurt." "I've told him already," said John firmly. "We need to start planning as soon as possible." Max took a drink of beer. He was only just getting over the excitement of the Christmas concert, but here was John now planning his next production. "Okay," said Max, and finished off his beer. "When do we start?" In the next few weeks, both Kurt and Max went back to their normal jobs, while John stayed at home. His freelance work didn't appear to concern him anymore. He did occasionally visit a client, but was soon back in his home, looking through pages of music, trying to decide what they would be singing at Easter. He now had a reputation for putting on a popular concert, and people were still talking about their night at the opera. He had produced a DVD of the music, and people were prepared to pay for a copy. Not much, as John thought it would be unfair to ask members of the choir to pay a large sum for their own performance, but enough to cover the costs. There were also photos to be sent out. He had chosen a few of the better ones and had printed off a few of them. Most of them were sent out by email, saving him the cost of printing. There was one photo that he loved, which had been taken up from high in the theatre and showed the full stage with all the choir members standing in rows. For John, this photo had captured the whole evening and experience, and he had found someone who could print it for him at poster size. This would be his crowning glory, and he finally framed it, hung it up in a prominent position in the lounge. He stood back and looked at it and admired it. The rehearsals had started again after the Christmas break, and although the weather was cold and snowing, the full choir turned up again in the same hall and practiced the new recital. Everyone was full of enthusiasm, and John was loving it. He could do no wrong. He was in demand, not only for the concert, but from other people around Brussels who would invite him to receptions and events where he was made to feel as if he was someone important in the city. Occasionally Max would go with him to some of these receptions. Kurt was never interested and was happy to stay at home on his own, playing with the latest computer games. He also liked staying on his own with the dogs. Through these receptions, Max began to meet more and more people. Interesting people. People who accepted him as John's friend and would greet him as if he too was someone important as well in the city. His social life was now taking off, and more he and John were seen as a couple. Kurt didn't mind this, as he knew there was nothing between the two men. Some people may have thought it was John, but John made no secrets that he was gay, and the majority of people accepted this without any question. They also assumed that Max must be gay as well, although Max himself was sure that he wasn't. Well, almost sure. But he had begun to question his own sexuality and wondered what it would be like for him if he truly was gay. That was not important now to him. He had learned not to really care what people thought about him, and since they knew nothing about him, or his background, or his history, he was happy for people to make up their own minds. Since moving to Belgium, he was happy to recreate himself, which had very little to do with who he had previously been. He could be anyone he wanted to be, and then people could make up their own minds about if they liked him or not. For the time being, he was enjoying life, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly free from all the expectations that other people had about him. The rehearsals were coming along smoothly, and everyone appeared happy with the itinerary. The only question was, where would they hold the next concert? It couldn't be at the Opera House, as John had a rule that he didn't return to the same place twice, or at least not in such a short space of time. John was sure that he wanted the concert to be in a church. His choice of music was definitely church music, and the venue was important to him. He wanted to be sure that the place for the concert reflected the content of the music. He would also do some music from his true love, which was opera. Perhaps he could do a short performance of a famous aria, or at least a popular piece of traditional music that everyone would recognize. That would give him something to focus on, and it would be the highlight of his Easter concert. As he poured through more and more pieces of music and listened almost hourly to his music CDs, John was becoming more and more frustrated. As they all sat one evening having a meal, John suddenly announced that he had finally made a decision. Kurt, as patient as ever, turned to him. "What decision, John?" he asked. "About the music. The music," he said, insisting that the others took notice. "For the Easter concert," he said as if it was the most important thing in the world. Kurt turned to him patiently. Max also stopped eating and looked at him. John stopped, and then looking around the table kept them waiting. Both Kurt and Max looked at him, waiting for some explanation. "The Hallelujah Chorus," said John suddenly in an excited voice. "It's brilliant! It's perfect!" Both Kurt and Max looked at him, trying to understand the subtle excitement. "You must know," John said. "From Handel's Messiah, the Hallelujah chorus from Handel's Messiah. What do you think?" he asked, waiting for the other two to be as enthusiastic and exciting as he was. "Great," said Kurt, doing his best to sound as enthusiastic as John was, but failing miserably. Max tried to support him and sounded more exciting. "Yes, great," Max said, not sure much emphasis he could put on it. It's a great choice." "Great," said John, sounding slightly disappointed. "It's a brilliant choice. Just wait till everyone in the choir hears about it." "John has another success," he said.